DEFRA's crisis over general licences is helping to kill the rural vote for the Tories. I had two chats with Basque staff Gareth Doherty, Ian Bell and Dr Marnie Lovejoy on the stage at the Carter Jonas Game Fair Theatre in July 2023. Between them they explain what GL43 is, how the system of general licences has lost trust with its client base, the people who live in the countryside, and how DEFRA is doubling down on getting it so badly wrong.
We had a licensing framework impositioned in and around European protected sites to allow game bird release if they are under a certain density threshold with a light touch license. So people don't have to apply for a license, they can rely on the license and release game birds accordingly. In the last couple of years, that has worked reasonably well. We had good engagement with DEFRA ahead of these licenses. They are annual licenses, so they come to an end every end of the May and are being reissued. So we had good engagement. This year the process has changed. So this year we were surprised to learn at the very last minute that the GL43 licensing framework has changed substantially. So now they are issued only for SACs, which are special areas of conservation, but not for SPAs. So only for one type of European protected sites.
And Marnie, how many shoots is that affecting?
We estimate that it has affected just short of 200 shoots, and it has affected them at a stage where they are very advanced in their business decisions, in their planning stages. So they will have ordered birds. Birds will be alive on the ground. They have a gamekeeper to pay, or a gamekeeper who potentially will lose their job, their livelihood. They have shoots or shoot days which they can't, which cannot go ahead. So it was at the 11th hour.
This is the third time in probably 4 years now that general licences in one form or another have been pulled by this government, a pro-shooting government, apparently. Secondly, with regards to this, we knew that the basis for General Licence 43, releasing on protected sites, came from a flawed judicial review launched by Wild Justice.
Right, we're going to have to spell all this out. So just releasing on protected sites, what does that mean and how does it affect
there's protected land across the UK for various reasons. In this particular incident, it's to do with land that's protected for bird breeding. Wild Justice launched a judicial review a couple of years ago, and the government legal department folded and said that releasing had to be licensed. The paper was put in front of the judge, even though it didn't go to court, and the judge had said that it was very unlikely, given the evidence that he'd seen, that Wild Justice had a case. So, flawed logic. We are no longer allowed to release on those protected sites.
Sorry, just get this right. So they said Wild Justice doesn't have a case, but we're going to do it anyway. Is that what happened?
Well, it was the other way around. They did it anyway, and then they got the message that they didn't really have a case.
Right. Okay.
So a bit bizarre. Anyhow, because of a perceived threat with avian influenza, which I'm not trying to suggest is not a serious issue, the licence to release on protected sites was pulled for a certain type of protected site this year. But it was done with no notice, no consultation, and I can run through the timelines, etc. Anyhow, why is that an issue? That's an issue because A, we don't believe the evidence exists. B, there is no requirement to do it linked to avian influenza. And C, most importantly, people's livelihoods, people's businesses, people's communities, and people's ways of life will be stopped, and are being stopped, and have been stopped.
Can I turn to Gareth now, because you're north of England, and I know, Ian, your shoot is one of the ones affected around Salisbury Plain, but Gareth, you have been to see shoots, quite a lot of shoots that are suffering from this right now, aren't you?
Yeah, well, our shoot's one of them actually. So we're quite fortunate at home. We have got a licence, so our licence is from the 1st of August. But if you look at if you look at the east, look at the North York Moors, my estimate would be that there'd be around 100 shoots there. There would be probably 200 shoots in the sort of Yorkshire, Lancashire belt. And as Ian said, anything that's on an SPA, so anything that's bird related, they had to apply for a licence. There was no consultation. They got no idea this was coming. This was dropped on our lap effectively at the end of May. And then, so shoots that aren't regularly logging onto the DEFRA website have got no reason to know this is happening. And then all of the planning that's happened for the best part of, well, from the November or December of the year before, all of the birds that have been ordered, all of the jobs that are in place, all of the bookings that have gone into hotels, everything that's gone on suddenly stops, and then they're told to carry on with the hope that they may or may not get a licence.
Gareth, what are the shoots saying to you, the affected shoots? What's the first thing they say when they ring you up?
The first thing is effectively, how did this happen? Why has there been no consultation? Why have they had no time to plan? The immediate reaction to it is usually anger. Then it's confusion. They've not really had it. They've had no clear guidance whatsoever from DEFRA. So DEFRA just seem to have gotten DEFRA and Natural England seem to have got themselves in a complete chaos. And then we've got shoots that have had to learn lots of complex information in a very short period of time when they didn't know it was coming, to then work out how that impacts them. Can they actually legally have birds on the ground? Can they not have birds on the ground? Are they going to get a licence? Are they not going to get a licence? So we've got shoots in complete limbo. Some shoots have got licences that are just about workable. Some shoots have had licences that are completely unworkable. Release dates of the 30th of September or 1st of October, which effectively is a refusal, and then other shoots have been completely refused. So a complete mixed bag.
All right, in specific cases where keepers are allowed to release in October, is there a system, is there forms they can fill out so they can move that date forward? Is that possible, Gareth?
So what we have seen in some locations, particularly since GWCT have involved at the DEFRA level, is we have seen some shifts. So effectively what happens is you get your release date. If that release date is at 30th of September or 1st of October, then there isn't an official appeals system, but there is definitely a route that you can go back to DEFRA and you can say, do you actually understand how we operate as a shoot? Do you actually understand that it's not within our interest for those birds to be walking across the SPA? This is how we keep the birds close. This is how we manage the system. And also, if those interested birds, so if it's golden plover, or if it's merlin, or if it's hen harrier, and those birds have hatched and effectively those birds have moved off the site, then we have found that there have been a shift and a bit more of a pragmatic view. But again, that's worked for some individuals. Some people have only got that late date, and some people have had complete refusals.
So in the Wildlife and Countryside Act, there is no appeals process for Section 16 licenses. So what they can do, and what we advise them to do, is if they have evidence to support that their license decision was wrong, to send it in. But the problem is it's completely at the discretion of DEFRA whether they will look at the evidence and whether they will change their minds. So there is no legal route. The only legal route we have is a judicial review, and that's the route we have to go down.
What's the social cost to the countryside, Gareth? What's going to happen to these shoots? I mean, are they going to survive another year after years of COVID and years of bird flu where they probably won't be able to shoot? How many of them are going to go?
Yeah, we are looking at considerable redundancies. So we've spoke to numerous shoots that say that they can't cope with it. Not another year, almost the third year in a row. So we are going to be looking at people losing their house, people losing their livelihoods, and that has an impact across the whole sort of cultural fabric of rural areas. So that's the kids in the schools, that's hotels, pubs, restaurants, everything that comes with shooting is going to be impacted from this.
Marnie, BASC is taking action, and that's your department, your legal. What are you doing? What's BASC doing to counter this decision from DEFRA?
Well, we obviously try to continue to engage with DEFRA and put pressure on DEFRA from different sides, legal pressure, political pressure. So we are trying to, get a solution quickly. However, we also have to go down the judicial review route because it's the only legal option we have, because there is no appeals process, so there's no other form of review available to us.
What does judicial review mean? What does that process involve?
So judicial review means that we ask permission for a high court to review the lawfulness of a decision making by a public department. So it's basically democratic checks and balances. So the judiciary will look at whether the executive has acted in accordance with the law.
And you're not just questioning their decision, you're questioning the way they made their decision, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not necessarily about whether the decision was right or wrong. We do believe it is wrong. We don't believe that there is evidence to support this decision. Actually, the evidence which was suggested is flimsy at best. But what is even worse is the way this decision came about. So the decision-making process is, in our opinion, absolutely outrageous.
So the government have quite a lot of powers with regards to disease, etc., in order to curtail our activities. We saw that with COVID, and we see that with AI. And our judicial review is based around a democratic right for, wherever possible, appropriate engagement and appropriate notice. And we have commitment from the last time something similar happened in writing from the government that we would be both engaged with and we'd get the right sort of notice. And in this case, we can demonstrate that we didn't. And so we are exercising our democratic right, using the BSC Fighting Fund in order to spend, as you suggest, an awful lot of money challenging the government on this. We want to send a message way beyond this government. We want to send a message to the devolved governments, to the civil service and any future government that we matter. And you can't deal with us like this because we have rights. Now, one thing I must say is, yes, this is BSC's judicial review because one group has to take a judicial review. But part of what we have to do is build big evidence packs, and there are what's called interested parties. They are people who have an interest, obviously interested parties, but they are people who are directly affected by this law. So we work very closely with some of our partner organisations, in particular the NGO, to help gather significant evidence packs that will underpin the judicial review and give us the best chance for success. One thing I would say related to that, we've already had a significant effect because this is unprecedented. We have not done this before, we as BSC or we as a sector, in this way.
You're not just up against the government on this one. There's another judicial review going at the same time, isn't there? While Justice has brought one to do the opposite of what you're doing.
Yeah, ours is related to lawmaking and governance, and theirs is related to what's actually happening and managing stuff on the ground. So some people are conflating the two, and indeed some in the civil service and government are suggesting that one balances out the other, but they don't. Fundamentally, they're two different legal beasts around the same subject. And we will either press ours until we win, or that we get GL43 reinstated, or that we've had absolutely the desired effect that everyone knows that our sector matter.
Sorry, I'll come to you in a sec, Gareth, but one more for you. What happens with the judicial review? Does the government ever fold up, or do they always fight them?
No, they don't. More often than not, they try and come to some sort of arrangement. They like to avoid going to court. I've no idea what's going to happen in this case.
I mean, that's the trouble with court, isn't it? You move your tanks onto their lawn and see what happens, don't you?
Yeah, and we just keep going, keep pressing. It makes relationships in certain areas difficult, but what it also does, bizarrely, it allows other areas to open up. So some of our partners, from Aim to Sustain, some of those are finding it easier to discuss this subject and engage with this subject. And I know the GWCT are deeply engaged in some of the advice because it's easy to hive us off because we're the naughty people in the corner who aren't playing nicely, who want to take them to court. Well, that's great. We'll just keep pressing on because the end result for the sector will be better.
Good cop, bad cop. Gareth, has shooting got time to wait for this outcome, or are we going to miss another season across hundreds of shoots that are affected by this action?
So, from our point of view, there's a dual approach. So, shoots out there that are currently being impacted by this, the legal challenge effectively isn't going to help them this season. So, our focus on the ground has very much been working with those individual shoots, and as Ian says, with the partners, whether that be the NGO or the MA as well, working with those individual shoots, helping them through the process. It's been chaotic is probably the nicest word I can possibly use for the way that Natural England and DEFRA have behaved around this situation. But we are seeing a shift. So we have seen, at the moment, we've got about 50 licences that have been approved. There's 122 that have gone through the system at the moment. There's 20 of them pending, and then the rest are sort of sitting somewhere out there in the ether. So we are seeing licences come through, but some of those licences practically don't work. Some of them, the release dates don't work either, and then some of them, the shoots can shoot this season. So it's making sure that individual shoot is supported as much as we possibly can on the ground.
So, yeah, okay, go on, Ian.
I just want to make a point on that. So part of what DEFRA and government are doing, you could either give them the benefit of the doubt, they're trying to be helpful, or you could just say actually they're trying to avoid the trouble. But through a lot of hard work, and I can see someone in the crowd there who's doing a lot of work on this on everyone's behalf. But through that hard work, some shoots are getting much later release dates that's related to the breeding season of the animal, of the birds that are being protected. Now, in some cases, my shoot captain sitting there, for our shoot, that's great. It means we'll get a season, but we're not commercial. It's just about us putting our money in our little community, so we'll be able to do something. But if you're a shoot that can't afford to lose the first 5, 6, 7 days of the season, I was with some people meeting some MPs the other day. One of the keepers there, he'd already been made redundant. The shoot had closed. The neighbouring one was going to have to do exactly the same. And this is a huge effect.
It's the stress that it puts on people. I mean, we were talking to one despairing gamekeeper who's allowed to release on the 1st of October. I mean, this is a DEFRA that believes you can bring birds in boxes and throw them up in the air. Is that what we're dealing with?
Yeah. So another example, we've got a shoot up in the North Pennines. And it's not all about big commercial shoots. You'll have everything from small syndicate shoots to medium-sized shoots. This is a relatively large commercial shoot, employing 2 full-time gamekeepers, $750,000 invested, and he's completely in limbo. And every single day he's picking the phone up and he's speaking to DEFRA and he's trying to get through to Natural England and he's saying, I need clarity. Am I going to get a licence? Am I not going to get a licence? Am I going to make these 2 people redundant? Are they losing their jobs? What's going to happen with the local pub down the road?
Nobody wants to take responsibility?
He has just had nothing back for the last 2-3 weeks.
Ian.
And, so we deal with all that. It's a lot of people, a lot of problems, a lot of business, a lot of way of life, a lot of community, all the stuff that we come here for. But then there's the animal welfare issue. So these birds, they exist.
They have hatched.
They are growing. They have to go somewhere. And we've, as a sector, have been put in a really difficult legal position. So if you can't release them somewhere, you can't sell them, you can't kill them, you can't release them, what do you do with them? You've got a responsibility for their welfare, and we've had some ridiculous advice from DEFRA that said, okay, if all these things are you can't actually solve that problem, then you can cull them. Well, we got formal legal advice and went back to them and said, yeah, but look at that formal legal advice. You can't because you're out of season. And they said, well, we did tell you had to get your own legal advice. So your advice as a government department is illegal. You've boxed us into a corner where many people do not have a legal
They just don't
course
seem
of
to be
action to
thinking.
take.
Gareth.
I was just going to say, I've learned you never trust government guidance if it clearly states at the end of the guidance, oh, by the way, we're not quite sure about this, please seek your own legal advice.
Right. Yeah,
so that basically says how good their advice is.
And that's happening a lot, I guess. It's all very legal and governmental and boffiny, Gareth. How are gamekeepers on the ground reacting to this? Are they just taking it on the chin, or is there anything they can do?
It's really, really challenging. So the best thing that we can do on the ground is work with our partner organisations, make sure that the most available information that we have is filtered through to the shoots, support people through their application processes. As Marnie says, if they get something that's unworkable, help them go back to DEFRA, get DEFRA to understand shooting practices. We spoke in detail over the weekend that it's not within the shoot's interest to see partridges or pheasants ranging across huge distances across these protected sites. By the very nature of shooting, we want to look after those game birds. We've worked for generations to understand how we can look after and feed those game birds and have that benefit to broader biodiversity. But it's not just, I think at the start of the process, there seemed to be very much a sort of paper-driven exercise that seemed to believe that the way that shoots operate is they literally fling game birds into the countryside and have no control as to how they interact with anything else, how those game birds are managed. So what has happened more recently, which I think is a bonus, is since GWCT have got involved with DEFRA, they've started to understand that there can be mitigation put in place, and the tiny risk of a game bird that's infected with AI walking out into an SPA and finding a bird feature, whether that be a stone curlew or a golden plover or a hen harrier or a merlin, is absolutely minuscule. So I think they're starting to understand that those mitigation measures can be put in place.
Well, the unfairness of it seems to me to stem from their use of avian influenza bird flu statistics from last year. They're trying to take the numbers from December 2022 and say this is affecting us now. Are you able to lever that in any way, Marnie?
Yeah, I mean, the qualitative risk assessment is the evidence base they're using. That was a snapshot of August, September 2022. And the actual scope, so the authors of this assessment state themselves, this assessment cannot be used for any previous or future outbreaks of avian influenza. So the scope is limited in itself. We got assurance as well from DEFRA that they will not take any policy decisions based on this assessment because it is limited to a certain period in time. Nevertheless, that was the basis of the decision.
And they're sticking to that argument. The DEFRA is still saying that it's because of bird flu that we're doing this.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what we have to understand is everybody wants to do something against bird flu because it is a very difficult disease. You know, we saw bird mortalities, which is a difficult thing to deal with. So public authorities want to be seen to be doing something. And in our opinion, they use shooting as a scapegoat. It's an easy approach. They can be seen to be doing something against avian influenza, and shooting is the convenient sector to put regulations on. Just to give you an example, in a buffer zone at the moment, where a license is refused, you can still have open pen chickens. So what's the difference between having pheasants in an open pen or chickens in an open pen?
The inconsistency, I mean, this must be an easy win for us. It's just going to take a long time.
Well, I would never say a judicial review is an easy win. Judicial reviews are unpredictable. So we have to wait and see, but we definitely have good arguments and a situation where we have to act, and judicial review is the only option.
On the ground, Gareth, I mean, after these 2 years of COVID and 1 year of bird flu and now this, are you seeing a kind of digging in and we're going to fight through this from the different areas of shooting? You've got your ordinary little walked up rough type day, you've got your mid-sized family stroke borderline commercial shoot, you've got your big commercial shoot. Are any of the sectors crumbling at all? Or is everybody saying, look, we can see this through, we'll put the investment of the gamekeepers, we'll make it happen? What's happening?
I suppose when across the community, you'll always get different reactions. There are some people that are fatigued and they're tired of the things that they're facing. But for the vast majority of us involved in shooting, it's our passion. It's culturally what we do. They want to fight for it. They're proud of the benefits they have to the local communities and to nature. And the really sad thing about this is that if you're a good shoot, that's delivering for biodiversity and delivering for your local community, unfortunately you're the one that's being picked on, because you're probably on a protected site, you probably had good numbers of bird features, and then because of the fact of what you've done for the last 20 or 30 years has benefited that conservation, you're now in a situation where you're now told that actually game bird release probably isn't an option for you. But I genuinely think, and we spoke before about what's gone on in Wales, and we spoke about, I know you spoke today earlier or yesterday about the firearms consultation. I think we are now moving into an era where people are starting to understand that, sort of mass responses and the shooting community standing up is becoming more and more important. And I think that fight is definitely there.
So for all the reasons a shoot is an SBA, it is what they're being punished for, effectively.
Yeah, so if you... disproportionately the uplands is being impacted because the uplands tends to deliver quite well for birds. So if you look at most of those upland sites, the shooting predates the designation. So we've always said that. It's a fine argument with grouse moors, isn't it? That the grouse moor shooting and that management existed way before it was an SPA, way before it was a triple SI, way before it was an SAC. So that management is intrinsically valuable to what that site needs. And then unfortunately you put on the precautionary principle and you put on potentially some people in these organisations that have probably a personal anti-shooting agenda, and you end up with a situation where if there's something good there, then every action and every plan or project or any activity that's going on simply needs to stop, because somehow that will protect the things that are actually thriving and living there. It just seems completely counterintuitive.
And we're making a lot of this, and for reasons Marnie has set out, reasons you've set out, it is also worth pointing out that 200 shoots is a very small percentage of the number of shoots in the countryside. I suppose it's a question about chipping away, isn't there? That you're seeing. Marnie, do you want to take this one? We're seeing an attack on a very small part of shooting, but what people here at the game fair will be saying is, look, this is yet another salami slice out of shooting, and that this is how the conservation industry, particularly because they look like the bad guys, and you've got to include Natural England and DEFRA in that. This is how they are attacking shooting.
Yeah, I think it could be seen as the thin end of the wedge. Same with the consultational licensing of game bird releases in Wales, which we had in the last few weeks and months. If you look at it from an avian flu perspective, avian influenza is fully regulated. So we do have regulations throughout Europe, actually. We do have the same regulations which regulate APA, highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks. It doesn't matter whether these are chickens, whether these are pheasants, it's the same rules that apply to everybody. But now, suddenly we have more stringent rules which only apply to shooting. And you said, 200 shoots, it's not very many, but if you are the gamekeeper who will lose their job because of this decision, who will then lose probably their home on the shoot, their vehicle, then it's a really big deal.
Is it true, the story I've heard, that they introduced they put the piece of paper on the DEFRA Secretary's desk, Therese Coffey's desk, when Lord Bennion, who's the one who knows about shooting, who's the minister, was on holiday, and that they basically snuck it through? Have you heard that?
I have not heard that, I have to say.
Good, okay, that's all right. It's a rumour that's doing the rounds at the moment.
It's interesting.
So I've asked some of the politicians here, look, are you going to blame the civil servants for this one? And we had Geoffrey Clifton Brown on the first day. He said, no, civil servants are absolutely wonderful people, never do that. And then we had Greg Smith MP for Buckingham yesterday. He said, yes, I do blame them, actually. He said, okay, it might not have been as deliberate as it looked, but he said, I put it to him that some of them are seeing a future career in the conservation industry for the National Trust, WWF and the RSPB. And he said he didn't go that far. He said they're not doing it so they get another job somewhere else. But he does blame the civil servants. In your dealings with government, I mean, what do you feel is the right answer here?
Well, what we see in many different areas is that decisions are being taken which are overly restrictive to appease certain conservation organisations or activists rather than conservation organisations, probably. We definitely see that. We see that in wildfowling consents. We see that here with avian flu, which is differently regulated for shooting than for any other activity.
Ian, we had Geoffrey Clifton Brown on the stage a little bit earlier on, who is fighting his own government. He's a Tory. It's the Tories that are doing this. I mean, it seems to me that this is the Department for losing the rural vote, DEFRA, at the moment, that they have decided to stop serving the countryside and throw their government to the wolves. I don't understand it. I mean, what are they thinking? Are you getting a sense of rats and sinking ships, or what's happening at DEFRA?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, we were running the Lord's Common shoot. I had 35 Tory MPs there. They were disgusted with what was going on. I've sat with Secretaries of State, ministers. They are appalled. We've got MPs coming through here throughout the whole weekend, and they are putting a whole raft of pressure. So what I would say to the people here and your friends and whoever, this might not affect you, but these sort of decisions made in this way may well affect us in the future. So please write to your MP, and we can give you the background information that you'll need, or whatever organisation you're a member of will do the same. If you can take the time and write to your MP to say this is outrageous, then please do.
This is the third time I've heard you say that on an issue this year.
Yeah, I know.
So we had the Welsh game bird release, consultation is underway. We've got the restrictions on certificates and gun ownership from the Home Office, and now we've got to write again. I mean, when does this stop?
And this is a pro-shooting government, apparently. So this is a time where we do need to engage. And we fully understand the difficulty with trying to generate action each time. But at the moment, that's one of the only ways that we believe that we can get aboard this. And we are finding that many of the rural MPs were just not aware of this. They had no understanding of it. And when they do get an understanding, they leap aboard it. Quite how much it will change, I don't know. And some of this stems from, I genuinely believe, certain agendas in certain places, be it DEFRA, Natural England, or whatever. Of course, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do believe that's.
Well,
the case.
Geoffrey said, try not to blame the officials at DEFRA, but he did say blame Natural England. He said they are a problem at the moment. Their chief executive clearly wants to get rid of shooting. There could be no other explanation. Gareth, one more. Yeah, finish up.
I was just going to say that they also need to remember that Natural England are a statutory advisor. They have the power to ignore them. So and they have. If you look at the past GL situation, they did that. They did a complete U-turn on what Natural England wanted. So there is that facility there.
And I am seeing a bit of divide and conquer and blame moving and what have you. I won't say who, but I've sat with some pretty senior folk who have said to me, or people have said, "Oh, but they didn't know what was going on." Well, it's your job.
Yeah.
So know what's going on, and we need to hold their feet to the fire, because it's our community's jobs and livelihoods and the things that we hold dear that are suffering.
They are. Right, thank you. Gareth, Ian, thank you so much for bringing that to the Game Fair Theatre stage.